So I'm going to be reading the first few chapters from Sashenka by Simon Sebag Montefiore, and this is a historical fiction novel which follows, or it starts with the story of a 16-year-old girl, Sashenka, and she is a really interesting character because she provides us, the reader, with an insight into the experiences of sort of the upper echelons of Russian society, but then she also allows us to um, glean or have a look into the underbelly of revolutionary Russia. What's great about this novel is that it will follow the Tsarist autocracy in 1916 where it starts, but then it will also allow us to track and follow the experiences of those under the Stalin dictatorship. So it's a really great opportunity just to get some context of the story of Russia.
It was only tea time, but the sun had already set when three of the Tsar's gendarmes took up positions at the gates of the Smolny Institute for Noble Girls. The end of term at the finest girls' boarding school in St. Petersburg was no place for policemen, but there they were, unmistakable in their smart navy blue tunics, with white trimming, shiny sabres, and lambskin helmets with sultan spikes. One clicked his fingers impatiently, another opened and closed the leather holster of his Mauser revolver, and the third stood stolidly, legs wide, with his thumbs stuck into his belt. Behind them waited a traffic jam of horse-drawn sleighs emblazoned gold and crimson, with family crests and a couple of gleaming limousines. The slow, slanting snowfall was visible only in the flickering halo of streetlights and the amber lamps of touring cars. It was the third winter of the Great War, and it seemed the darkest and the longest so far. Through the black gates, down the paved avenue, the white splendour of the pillared institute rose out of the early twilight like an ocean liner adrift in the mist. Even this boarding school, of which the Empress herself was patron, and which was filled with the daughters of aristocrats and war profiteers, could no longer feed its girls or heat its dormitories. Term was ending prematurely. The shortages had reached even the rich. Few could now afford the fuel to run a car, and horsepower was fashionable again. The winter darkness in wartime St. Petersburg had a sticky, arctic gloom, all of its own. The feathery snow muffled the sounds of horses and engines, but the burning cold made the smell sharper. Petroleum, horse dung, the alcohol and the breath of the snoring postilions, the acrid cologne and cigarettes of chauffeurs in yellow and red trimmed uniforms, and the flowery scents on the throats of the waiting women. Inside the burgundy leather compartment of a Delaunay Belleville launderette, a serious young woman with a heart-shaped face sat with an English novel on her lap, lit by a naphtha lamp. Audrey Lewis, Mrs. Lewis to her employers and Lala to her beloved charge, was cold. She pulled the bushy lambskin up over her lap. Her hands were gloved, and she wore a wolf fur hat and a thick coat, but still she shivered. She ignored the driver Pantaleon when he climbed into his seat, flicking his cigarette into the snow. Her brown eyes never left the door of the school. "Hurry up, Sashenka," Lala muttered to herself in English. She checked the brass clock set in the glass division that kept the chauffeur at bay. Not long now. A maternal glow of anticipation spread across her chest. She imagined Sashenka's long-limbed figure running towards her across the snow. Few mothers picked up their children from the Smolny Institute, and almost no fathers. But Lala, the governess, always collected Sashenka. Just a few minutes, my child, she thought. My adorable, clever, solemn child. The lanterns shining through the delicate tracery of ice on the dim car windows bore her away to her childhood home in Pegston, a village in Hertfordshire. She had not seen England for 6 years, and she wondered if she would ever see her family again. But if she had stayed there, she would never have known her darling Sashenka. 6 years ago, she had accepted a position in the household of Baron and Baroness Zeitlin and a new life in the Russian capital, St. Petersburg. 6 years ago, a young girl in a sailor suit had greeted her coolly, examined her searchingly, and then offered the Englishwoman her hand, as if presenting a bouquet. The new governess spoke scarcely a word of Russian, but she knelt on one knee and enclosed that small hot hand in her own palms. The girl, at first hesitantly, then with growing pressure, leaned against her, finally laying her head on Lala's shoulders. Menez vous, Mrs. Lewis, said the Englishwoman in bad Russian. Greetings to a bespoke guest, Lala. I am Benin Sashenka, replied the child in appalling English. And that had been that. Mrs. Lewis was henceforth benamed Lala. The need met the moment. They loved each other on sight. It's 2 minutes to 5, said the chauffeur tinnily through the speaking tube. The governess sat forward, unhooked her own speaking tube, and spoke into the brass cup in an excellent Russian, though with an English intonation. Thank you, Pantaleon. What are the farers doing here? Said the driver. Everyone used the slang term for the political police, the gendarmerie. He chuckled. Maybe the schoolgirls are hiding German codes in their petticoats. Lala was not going to discuss such matters with the chauffeur. Pantaleon, I'll need you to come in and get her trunk, she said sternly. But why were the gendarmes there? She wondered. The girls always came out on time. Madame Buxhoven, the headmistress, known to the girls as Grand-Maman, ran the institute like a Prussian barracks, but in French. Lala knew that Grand-Maman was a favourite of the Dowager Empress Maria Fordunova and the reigning Empress Alexandra. A cavalry officer and a gaggle of schoolboys and students in gold-buttoned uniforms and caps walked through the gates to meet their sweethearts. In Russia, even schoolboys had uniforms. When they saw the 3 gendarmes, they started, then walked on, glancing back. What were the political police doing at a boarding school for noble girls? Waiting to convey their master's daughters home, the coachman, in ankle-length padded robes lined with thick white lamb's fur, red sashes and bowler hats, stamped their feet and attended their horses. They too observed the gendarmes. 5 o'clock. The double doors of the Smolny swung open, casting a ribbon of canary light down the steps towards the gates. Ah, here they come! Lala tossed her book aside. At the top of the steps, Madame Buxhoven, severe in her black cape, serge dress, and high white collar, appeared in the tent of light, as if on wheels like a sentry on a Swiss clock, thought Lala. Grandmaman's mottled bosom, as broad as an escarpment, was visible even at this distance, and her ringing soprano could crack ice at 100 paces. Even though it was freezing, Lala pulled down her window and peered out, excitement rising. She thought of Sashenka's favourite tea awaiting her in the little salon and the biscuits she had bought especially from the English shop on the embankment. The tin of Huntley and Palmer's was perched beside her on the burgundy leather seat. The coachmen clambered up on their creaking conveyances and settled themselves, whips in hand. Pantaleon pulled on a beribboned cap and jacket trimmed in scarlet and gold, and stroking a well-waxed moustache, winked at Lala. Why do men expect us to fall in love with them just because they can start a motor car? Lala wondered, as the engine chugged, spluttered, and burst into life. Pantaleon smiled, revealing a mouthful of rotten fangs. His voice came breathily through the speaking tube. So where's our little fox then? Soon I'll have 2 beauties in the car. Lala shook her head. Hurry now, Pantaleon, a trunk and a valise, both marked Aspreys of London. Bistro, quick.